I dag har jeg fornøjelsen af at præsentere to af verdens absolut største kapaciteter inden for forandringsledelse. Det er Linda og Dean Anderson. De er i Danmark i disse dage for at præsentere den danske udgave af deres bestseller Beyond Change Management, og på dansk hedder den Nøglen til forandringsledelse. Welcome to you, Dean and Linda.
Thank you.
My first question is to you, Linda. It seems that you two are partners in more than one sense, and being first, the name of your company, also has a double meaning. And I kind of sense that your position is a combined one that often maybe in academic discussions would be seen as contrasting or maybe even competing. But maybe you can elaborate a little bit on the position that being first is taking.
Yes. Well, being first to us is very much about helping leaders to be successful in change through becoming more of who they are and more of what's necessary for the human beings of their organization to make those changes be successful. So we've brought together both specialties of personal change and organizational change. And you're right, many different approaches will split those two. Our unique approach is integrating those two to be really a true methodology for succeeding at transformational change.
Mm-hmm. And in the Danish translation of your book, the subtitle mentioned the word being conscious about what you're doing when doing change.
Yes.
And this consciousness is also a vital part of your book. But how can this self-awareness, this consciousness be established for leaders and organizations? Maybe you, Dean.
Well, the focus very clearly is that in our experience as human beings, we have both an inner experience of what goes on inside of us, our hopes, our fears, our doubts, and our anxieties, and change that might manifest as our commitment to the change or our resistance to the change. And clearly, we're leading out here in the world, so we're trying to change things in the world. We're trying to change our systems and our organizations, our technology, the way we're structured. And often those things are split, where we focus on the external, but we forget the internal. And so what we're bringing is a way to focus both on the internal reality as well as the external at all levels of the system. So individuals learning more about their own inner dynamics and how they perform extraordinarily well out in the world. And then at the same time, how teams functioning in terms of their own norms and what we might call that internal dynamic of a team, their morale, how they act together, how they cooperate or not. And then, of course, at the organizational level is culture. That's an internal dynamic of the organization. So we're blending that internal work with the external work through the leadership of change so that both of those pieces of our reality can change together, because if just the external changes happen without the internal changes coming with them, so people really buying in and committing, well, then those external changes never really produce the results they otherwise could.
Mm-hmm. So what kind of activities should leaders and organizations engage in to work on both the internal and external side or dimension of change? Your book is all about that. So I know it's a quite comprehensive framework, but just short for starters.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Well, the initial activity is how do you begin the conversation with leaders for them to recognize that they do have an internal reality that is having a direct impact on their success and their ability to bring the organization into the future. So beginning to educate, to coach, to talk about how do they think, how do they behave, and is that actually what they need in order to produce the outcomes they want. So part of it is personal awareness, part of it is coaching. We have a 4-day experience called Walking the Talk of Change that we put leaders into so that they fully understand they have a mindset, they have an orientation, they have a relationship with their peers and with the organization that impacts their change. And once we get that going, then we can continue to work it as we go forward with making the actual external changes in the organization.
So it's really important to being before becoming something else.
Exactly, and bringing your being into the changes that have to be made in the organization, so the two truly are integrated.
It takes me on to, I've written on your website that especially you, Dean, is focusing on co-creation,
Yes.
creating things together. And in my experience, I think that's going to have a growing importance in working with, especially
Yes.
large organizations, where I come from a 20,000 people organization.
Yes.
And I must admit that quite often I see that at the outset, it seems like we are going to do this together. We have time, resources, we communicate, we try and engage the organization. But at some point in time, it seems that the leaders are commanding the change, and that people, employees, seems to find themselves in a position of victims to change.
Yes.
But how could co-creation perhaps mitigate those risks of change?
Yes. Well, co-creating is really a foundation of the type of leadership that's required to meet the challenges that we have in our organizations, let alone our nations in the world. And we've got to work more closely together, because no one person, whether a leader or not, has the answer. And so the critical understanding from our perspective is that we each as leaders, or just as people, no matter what our role is that we need to shift the way that we see things. And right now, most of us tend to focus on what's most important to us. Now that may manifest as our team, right, or our department, or maybe at the world level, or our nation at the expense of other nations. And co-creation is all about, instead of looking down into my own personal need, I look up and across at what the whole system needs. And what that means for leaders is, instead of being what we would call in the space and in control, their job now is to step out and what we call hold the space, so others can come in with them, and through dialogue and working together collaboratively, come up with solutions that will solve the larger issues for the whole system. And so the major focus here is what we would call attending to the big win. So we think of co-creating as not win-lose, you win, I lose, or even win-win, because win-win is often a compromise. But instead what we would call win-win-win. So 3 wins, where the first one's the big win. So where you and I are now on a team across our old boundaries, where we maybe competed, but now we're unified on a team looking at what's best for the larger system. And what that requires is a basic evolution of the individual's own mindset, because they have to grow beyond their own self-interest to think about the other in the whole system. So that's why personal change is so important as you try to do organizational change, because the transformations that we're facing in our organizations are so complex, it requires that kind of collective effort.
And I know, talking about space, it seems that you have a foothold in Scandinavia. Valcon, a very successful Danish consultancy company, has been part of the Danish translation and kind of adapting the roadmap to leadership, change leadership, to a Scandinavian context, perhaps. What is your estimation of the well-being and readiness to maybe the big win in Scandinavian companies?
Well, through our Valcon colleagues, because they really are the ones doing the work here, they are more and more excited by how much more interest there is by senior leadership in being able to entertain succeeding a change through doing the personal and leadership work, as well as organizing and orchestrating the organizational changes. So our reflection is their reflection. They're finding more and more of it, and also more of an orientation to changing the culture and the ways of being in the organization. So they are finding much more openness to looking at the human dynamics, as well as orchestrating the change through good process dynamics. So we're enthusiastic because we're hearing the stories and the cases of success that they're having, and more in this direction.
Thank you very much, both Dean and Linda.
You're very welcome.
Yes, thank you.